I recently touched on the topic of Ildiz and the need for a renewal. I'd also like to explain a few things from my point of view, since we're now just a step away from the end of this break and will soon be back to thinking in terms of the ball rolling. It's still far too early to talk about the transfer market. And above all, you have to deal with money that isn't yours but belongs to others. Why do I say this? Why? It's too easy to say. Tissot returns to Italy and signs a contract with you when you may not realize his salary, how much he earns, how much he would like to earn, and above all, how much he has no intention of giving up anything. And as much as it is possible to make a sacrifice, I've never seen anyone from Renault say, I'll give up 6 million, 4 million, 3 million, because I'm doing you a favor and I have to come back to you. So for now, I would distance myself from situations that will need to be evaluated later on. Why do I say this? Because people are automatically linked who might actually want to come back to Italy, but when they look at their wallet, their assets, their bank account, their salaries, their wire transfers, their contracts, there are three names that, from my point of view, make the difference. Milinkovic, Savic, Frankesi, and Kim. These are three players who, if they decided to end their current experiences with their respective clubs, would have so many offers. And they certainly wouldn't give any discounts. Maybe they could give up something, but not discounts big enough to make you think they're not doing you a favor, nor are they doing you a favor by coming to play for you. So we don't gamble with other people's money, we just gamble with people. Milinkovic Savic made both a lifestyle and financial choice, let's be honest, because when you go to the other side of the football world and earn a salary close to 20 million a season, he certainly found his old coach from his time at Lazio, Inzaghi. I also take this as a starting point to say that when you're in another league, you then have to start over to return to a European context, especially after you've spent 2 or 3 seasons there. Would Milinkovic be useful to the big Italian clubs? Very useful, of course. Even 60% of Milinkovic, who made the difference, the sergeant of Lazio, Juventus, who came very close, then Al Hilal, who made a decisive move with that contract offer, I wouldn't rule out that he might start missing real European football. I also wouldn't rule out that maybe Simone Inzaghi could try to convince him to stay. But before we start playing with other people's money, the same goes for Kim and Kessie, we need to be careful because we risk creating a head-to-tail effect or a boomerang effect that could make all the difference. Frank Kessie, in my opinion, is a bit fed up with where he is. He's still relatively young since he hasn't turned 30 yet. At a certain point, let's be honest, you get 6, 7, 8, 10 wire transfers, but you see that football isn't what it used to be. The football you're playing now isn't the one you were used to. Sometimes you feel a bit nostalgic and you wonder who Kessie would actually be useful for, but that's what I think. For the 3 or 4 top Italian clubs, for the 4 teams that are top clubs in Italy. But the thing is, when he was offered in January, they found out he was asking for 12 to 14 million per season. And from this point of view, before playing with other people's money, we need to understand his willingness to come back down to earth. 4, 4.5, 5 million, 5.5 million, maybe 6, and that's the absolute maximum. But there has to be someone willing to pay him that. Even Kim himself can't be thrilled about his experience with Bayern. And Kim himself, last January, was offered to English clubs as well to test the waters and see if a deal was feasible, in this case regarding his salary. We're talking about salaries in the double digits or thereabouts, maybe even higher. With bonuses, it doesn't change much. Would you see him back in Italy? Who might be interested? If Milan were to decide to bring in a quality defender to strengthen an already solid backline, they would definitely be interested. Allegri would be the first to speak up. And maybe there have been some inquiries, but again, we're talking about salaries that Milan hasn't paid in recent times. Inter themselves might look for a defender after trying to rejuvenate the squad and searching for young talents. With an ID card, let's say a bit fresher. We're playing, but we're not really playing. And above all, it's important not to fill up now. The price pool, creating the illusion of things that at this moment don't belong to reality, because no one is actually looking for them in a concrete way when it comes to money. when and if we have to get into that kind of situation, that is talking about money and making an offer in line with 30, 40, or 50% of their usual earnings, especially in the case of those whose contracts aren't expiring, then in my opinion will be entering a different game, one that's not just a game. In this play on words, instead, we should get used to a different kind of situation. Let's not play with the feelings of those who cost a lot. I'm referring to Jonathan David and his salary, rather than playing with other people's money. We figured out the best way not to burn through yet another striker at Juventus, because otherwise we always talk. That one should be signed, the other is perfect for the midfield. We need to make a sacrifice, we need to solve a problem. But then, when you do make the sacrifice, you don't know how to use him. And I think that's one of the biggest disappointments of the first part of the season. Because if you look at Jonathan David's technical and tactical background, you'll notice that he has always played with another striker. Even in Canada's last 0-0 draw, with all due respect to his partner, who certainly isn't the new Van Basten, he gives his best when he's supported by another striker, ideally with wing play that can complement his characteristics. Why do I say this? Because it's easy to play with other people's money, but it should be even easier not to play with the money you've already spent. So what do I expect? I expect that some reflection has already taken place. I've read some reports from training sessions or related projections. There could be some tactical changes. In other words, Tudor would like to play with a striker alongside Jonathan David. In my opinion, that would be a sign of a turning point, which could prevent us from having to say certain things in mid-November or on December 10th. It's a mistaken signing because it's not actually a mistaken signing. Provocatively, I even made a video some time ago saying, give him to Gasperini and you'll see that Jonathan David's game will change. So rather than saying, as I've heard, it's a bad signing, they spent too much money, he's not Juventus material, he's not the right striker, why don't we try to put him in the right conditions without worrying about money already spent to let him show his potential? Let's remember what he's done in his career and that the goals he scored weren't just by chance. I hope that during this break, instead of greedily thinking about who should come in, speculating with other people's money, thinking about what others should give up and how much they should sacrifice to come to you, let's try not to waste what you spent just 10 minutes ago, not 10 years ago. We're talking about deals from last summer, and I expect that the coaches, who are very well paid, will put us in a position to understand whether it was a bad signing. In the specific case of Jonathan Davies, I don't think so. Or maybe with some adjustments, with some not so magical formula, with some tactical tweaks, we can finally understand that last summer we weren't talking about a nobody, but about a striker who needs to be put in a position to make an impact. I'm looking forward to your comments. Thank you for your attention, and we'll see you again soon. Bye.